I swear I didn't plan this, but it's time to talk about vampires on Discworld. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about Discworld. This is about Carpe Jugulum, or however you want to pronounce this. Book 23 in publication order of Discworld, and this is obviously part of that great Discworld read-along that I'm doing with some good friends. And if you want to join at this fairly late stage, well, we're halfway through, maybe join us on the Unabridged Burners Discord, where we will talk about the next one, which is The Fifth Elephant. And there will be a full-on discussion, not for the internet, just for those who want to join, on the 13th of November. So in 2 weeks, you got time until then to read The Fifth Elephant, which is another Sam Vimes book, and features werewolves. So there you go. If you can't get enough of the Halloween spirit, that's where you'll be. And from now on, this will be the usual stuff, talking about, well, Discworld. Alright, the non-spoiler part, although I still believe that it's very difficult to actually spoil Discworld novels. And, well, Carpe Jugulum is another witches book. It is set in Lancre mostly. It actually shows us the country of Uberwald for the first place. Maybe maybe I should actually call it Überwald, because it is written in a very German way, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And it features vampires and other magical creatures, and once more, the witches, which are new witches partly at least, have to go and defend Lancre from another invasion from the even more fantastic. It deals with the usual questions of gender roles, of class struggle, and a lot more. It is funny, slightly horrific, and, well, it makes a lot of fun of vampires. So if you're into vampires, this might just be the book for you. Beyond that, well, it's a fun book, so go and read it. I mean, it's a Discworld book, so go and read it already, right? And from now on, we'll talk about specific themes, topics, elements, and maybe that best of jokes, the cluster suck. Alright, I assume you have read it by now, or you don't care. So let's talk about the main themes of this book. And we'll start with the big one, vampires. See, vampires are obviously a cultural phenomenon that has been around for a long time in all kinds of places. All kinds of cultures have legends of vampires. We all know that in our mind somewhere. And Terry Pratchett obviously knew, so he's making fun of that as well when he talks about all kinds of different ways to kill a vampire, which are sometimes very, very funny. And I appreciate that, but it goes beyond that, because, see, the vampire, and the modern vampire, the Count Dracula vampire, got popular around the end of the 19th century, and there is a very specific element to vampirism, or the way it was portrayed by Bram Stoker, that struck a chord back then and probably does still. And Pratchett also picks up on that, and that is, you guessed it, capitalism. See, the idea of an aristocrat of whatever form living on the actual blood of their, well, people, basically, or the people they care for, or the people in their responsibility, or whatever you want to call it. Well, that's kind of symbolic, isn't it? And it works for feudalism, of course it does, where you run the country and you drink the blood, or, well, take the money, food, or whatever you have of your peasants and your tenants, or whatever you want to call them. Well, that's clear. But see, with the entire 19th century of industrialization, that obviously shifted. And when Bram Stoker wrote that book, and it became hugely popular, right? While aristocracy was still an issue, especially in Britain, and that's probably a reason why an Irishman like Stoker wrote that book, and why it, worked so well in Britain, is because the aristocracy still has a lot of power, still owns a lot of land, and does still live off the land, or the people actually running the land. But it also had gone through probably one of the roughest ways, or of industrialization, which, well, started, well, I don't want to say started, but it was certainly a hotbed of communism and Marxism back in the day, because, you know, Marx and Engels, for all kinds of reasons, lived in London. And that's sort of where that is transferable, because, you know, the owner of a factory does also live off the blood of their, you know, laborers, their workers. And, you know, sometimes quite literally when you look at all the harsh, you know, conditions in industrialization. So yes, the vampire does personify that in a lot of ways. And the big question then is like, how does the vampire get away with it? And Pratchett obviously has an answer for that, and that is glamour in a lot of ways. And I think it's one of the strengths of A. Terry Pratchett, and B, the vampire myth and the way he tackles it in this book, that this works all the way up to now. It's like, why do we still entertain, like, you know, or keep super rich people around? Well, a lot of it is because of glamour. It's like, people are watching the Kardashians for some reason, and I guess the reason is they're rich and glamorous. And we kind of feel bad to, you know, just go and throw rotten fruit at them all the time. Or, you know, I don't want to say, you know, stake them out or whatever, because you know what I mean. But that's sort of like the answer that Terry Pratchett has there, is like, people are intimidated easily, and people fall for that grace and glamour that comes with power and money, of course. So that's certainly something that I found. I mean, obviously, I found it really good, but it's important to understand that it's certainly, I'm not the first person who thinks of that. And Terry Pratchett also wasn't the first person who thought about that. But he managed to, you know, put it in the usual Discworld terms, which are obviously the best terms. So having that as one of the overarching, you know, themes of the novel works really well, and it ties back into the next one, or in one of the key things that Terry Pratchett has talked about before, all the way back with Granny Weatherwax in Witches Abroad, which is like, when you start to treat people as things, that's when you go wrong. And well, I mean, this is not yet the communist propaganda channel that it may be, but the idea that the way, I mean, the term human resource is something that kind of does ring hard that way. And it is important to understand, I feel, that Pratchett is aware of these kind of, you know, connotations of a term like human resource. So yeah, vampires do have human resources in a lot of ways, and Pratchett does not shy away from that. And I think the important bit that he does here is one that maybe works better for someone from Britain in a way, where we talk about the difference between slavery in a way and violence and so forth to what vampires do in a modern, you know, capitalist society in a way. And that is, we're doing it to ourselves. And obviously, that's Pratchett's huge issue here, right? It's like the old vampires. Well, no one ever claimed the old vampire just going and, you know, killing people or drinking their blood was a good thing. But they didn't tell anyone that it was right that they're doing it. But what happens with these new formed vampires that we have here in Carpe Jugulum is that they make deals with people, and people are giving up their blood and their children and all of that willingly for, you know, a bit of peace, I guess, and a bit of glamour, a bit of like rubbing off glamour that rubs off those vampires. And that's where the darkness lies for Pratchett, like the really terrible darkness. Because the other one, you can fight, it has clear-cut lines between good and evil, and Pratchett is very clear on the fact that, yes, this type also has those divides between good and evil. And with Pratchett, it's always about questions of good and evil and right and wrong. And this book probably spells it out clearer than a lot of other books. And that's something that I found interesting this time round. But obviously, there's more than just a critique of capitalism in this. And I think that's part of the strength of this novel, because it does also talk about other elements. And we'll come back to that. It ties back to that later on. I'll just drop the word fascist already, because we'll come back to that. Another big theme here is the idea that with that new modern age that the vampires are bringing, where people make treaties and deals and stuff like that, and give up their humanity willingly for that new age comes something else, and that is the vampires fight against other magical creatures, whether they are pixies or the phoenix in this case, and the phoenix is obviously a very, very powerful symbol there. And, centaurs that are mentioned, and other magical creatures, and there's, according to the vampires, no room for those magical creatures, for that magic in the new world. Now, we need to keep in mind here, like vampires are obviously also supernatural, dwarves and trolls as well, and the terminology that Pratchett uses in this novel to talk about these people is sometimes lesser races, humanity is one of them, according to the vampires, but also, evolutionary cul-de-sacs or dead ends and stuff like that. That's the language of eugenics in a lot of ways. And we'll get deeper into that in a moment, don't worry. And I'm not saying you can read this book as an analogy of the dialectics of enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer, because I'm not that kind of channel yet. But the idea that the age of rationality opens doors to all kinds of new cruelty, to all kinds of horrors that are tied to that rationality, is, once again, something that I haven't thought of. It's something that Pratchett didn't think of, but something we probably all picked up upon. So an age in which we decide that there are ranks of humanity between people, whether it's, vampires and so forth. Yes, there are different species on Pratchett's world, on Discworld, but at the end of the day, they are all, people, is Pratchett's term, and I think that's important. Once we sort them into lesser and higher, and once we make deals with those people, that's when we, give over to exactly just to rationality, because once again, those vampires are very, very rational in this specific story, and they want to, leave the magic and the fantasy behind. And there's an important element here that I think ties back to what Terry Pratchett does a lot of in his entire work, and that is humanity needs fantasy. Humanity needs the magical. We need the magic as part of us. Once we willingly give that up to what you might call progress or not, well, that's when you lose your humanity. That's when you turn yourself into things. Others are already doing it, but they're evil, and there's no two ways about it. They are actually evil in this book and anywhere else. And I find this a very poignant way of reading this book that I I subscribe to, and it made it much more interesting than, I don't know, the first time I read it. But there is, of course, more in this book. Once again, this is a witches book, so we need to talk about the witches. And something that I find interesting here is roles. Now, obviously, Terry Pratchett has talked about gender roles before, and he will talk about it much more in the future. In fact, I think Carpe Jugulum is sort of a watershed book in Discworld publication history, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what we have here is, we have very different women. We have Granny Weatherwax, we have Nanny Ogg, we have Margaret Garlick, who is now queen, and we do have Agnes Nitt, Perdita from the last witch's book, Masquerade, who is now a witch. And we see also that there are, obviously, and this is going back to tradition, and we'll talk about it in a second, we have the fact that there are like 3 roles for witches: the mother, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And you know those, obviously, from, George R. R. Martin picking them for his, female side of the 7. They're part of folklore, those, classic roles for women. And the thing is that, and I like the way Pratchett does this, that according to tradition, those are the only 3 roles that women have. And instead of just, questioning that, Pratchett uses a very clever technique here, which is, once, Margaret becomes a mother, in a way, and Agnes Nitt becomes the new maiden in that triumvirate of witches, there are 4 witches in Longcrow, because there's also Nanny Ogg, who used to be the mother, and there's Granny Weatherwax, who used to be the crone. But now that we have that 4th witch, there's 1 witch too many, or 1 role too few. And I like the way we see over the book how every one of the new, well, of the three, that being Nanny Ogg, McGrath, and Agnes Nitt, take on those specific aspects of the role while Granny Weatherwax is standing outside of it. The idea that these predefined roles kind of take over our lives, no matter which gender, actually, I think is really powerful. And the fact that, yeah, it is, we need to stay outside or step outside those defined roles to actually, be who we truly want to be. That part, I think, was handled really well, because not the usual someone just like trying to not be the person they are or whatever, but to see people shifting from one role in which they have been cast before. Like, we had the whole maiden, mother, crone thing come up before, although Pratchett usually does the whole, like, because no one wants to be the crone, it's like the maiden, the mother, and the other one. We see now that people have to adjust to a new role, how they're struggling with that, and how they're struggling with those predefined ideas. And I felt that was a really clever way to handle that, and one that I want to say I hadn't thought about before, but it's something, it gave me a new perspective or a new angle on it, and that's why I read Pratchett. That's why I reread Pratchett for a lot of times. Because previously this was one of my least favorite Discworld novels, if not the least favorite one, and I think I got a lot more out of it this time round. So, what else is there? Well, there is obviously the last big theme, which is personal responsibility. Obviously, Pratchett has always been very much about personal responsibility, about humanity, what it means to be human, what it means to be, to have dignity and so forth. And this comes with the idea of certainty. And we see it in the beginning, where the vampires decide that, like, people that are certain about who they are and are certain about everything are very, very easy to manipulate. Whereas people who are divided in their mind, who question stuff, who think about stuff and are uncertain, they are hard to manipulate. We see this very specifically with both Agnes and the preacher, the Mighty Oates, whom I really love. We see that happening there. It's like they can't get a grip on their mind because they don't know, they are uncertain. And Pratchett does a clever thing here, because the point is not to be uncertain. The point is to be uncertain, to question, to think about things, but when it counts, to actually also make a decision. We see that, built up through the novel. We start with Granny Weatherwax, who is very much the ideal person here, right? She's not perfect. In a lot of ways, she's terrible, but she does do that. We have that whole decision with the pregnant woman at the beginning, who either she can save the child or she can save the mother. And it's Granny Weatherwax who decides, because those decisions are hard. And the question, or the point for Pratchett is, I'm not fully agreeing with him here, because it's a very libertarian approach to think to the personal responsibility. But Granny Weatherwax decides that she is the one who can take that and take the cost of decisions, because choices always cost us. So she does that. And we see throughout the book both Agnes and the Mighty Oates coming to terms with the fact that they need to make choices, that they need to decide things and be in one mind to actually get things done. But it's important that you make that choice yourself, that you make that way through the indecision, and you don't just start out certain, because that's the problem. I think there's a lot in there that is, well, quintessential Terry Pratchett. It's also, a lot of it is, especially when we talk about the Mighty Oates, it's very much also about Terry Pratchett's approach to agnosticism or religion and faith. And it personally made me very happy to read this with all those callbacks to Small Gods, which we have in here, where all the things that the Mighty Oates is doing are very similar to how Brother does things or thinks about things, or the way, so the path that the Mighty Oates takes through this novel, the whole journey, character journey that he has here, mirrors that of Brother in a lot of ways, just in a more modern way, in a different time, in a different place. But the questions are the same, which is, make up your own mind. Don't think too hard about doctrine. It may just be there as guidelines in easy situations, but when things get hard, what you have to think about is you and your personal humanity and what you can do for yourself. And the point where the Mighty Oates burns the Book of Om, so Granny Weatherwax and him will not freeze in the forest is a very powerful one, because that's exactly what it's about. It's like faith can help you, but you also need to help yourself. Now, once again, I'm not agreeing with all of these points personally, but I think they are extremely well explored in a still very funny way, and that's obviously the strength of Discworld, as we all know. So, what else is there? Well, there is, of course, the Knack McFeagles. They will come up again, the Wee Free Men, and they're gnomes, but they're even more gnomey than the gnomes that we've seen before in earlier Discworld novels, like Jingo, and the other one, Feet of Clay. But they are also, now they're a tribe. There is obviously jokes that you might want to think about. The fact that they have like a very Scottish accent, you might think of that as problematic in a way, because, it's certainly painting them in a very specific way, especially when you look at, the UK and how it runs and things, how British people think of Scottish people and so forth. But they're still funny, and I think they are there for a reason. That is this like more the wild side that is in every human, in a way. It's just like it's all wild side in them, and Pratchett does manage a very interesting thing here when we see King Verns, drinking their brew to actually go back and fight and take over his castle, which is, we have that in us. And it'll come back when we talk about Sam Vimes and what he calls the Beast. And I think it hasn't come up yet, but it will definitely come up in the upcoming books. Now, we have that darkness in us. We need to keep it under control, but sometimes we need it. And I think Pratchett introduces that concept in Carpe Jugulum with having those gnomes who don't have that control, but then they're human. They're not human. They're gnomes. They're just the magical, the wild, the dark side, basically, that we need to be full people. Once again, and that kind of ties back to that whole idea that the age of rationality, of progress, does, deny us that side, and that comes at a cost, and that cost might just be part of our humanity, just, turning us more into things than we were before. And once again, that's a very powerful idea, and Discworld is all about very powerful ideas dressed up in very funny jokes. And there's a lot of funny jokes in this book. Like, seriously, once again, I have to say, no one except Terry Pratchett could just drop the word cluster suck in a vampire book and make it really, really funny. And it works. And there's a lot more of these kind of jokes that I like. The vampire jokes are kind of funny. The Nanny Og is Nanny Og, and that's always really cool. But, it's a fun book in that regard. It has the slapstick, it has the troll trying to be in a border guard. All of these ideas, I think, work really well in this Lancre book, with all these ideas like how people hang on at the edge, being human and trying to deal with, ideas of progress in their own way, which is usually not liking them, but grudgingly moving forward and trying to keep their humanity. So, what can we say in final about Carpe Jugulum? Well, it's another Discworld novel. It's a great Discworld novel, and it does encapsulate a lot of the things that Terry Pratchett was thinking about at the time, and that are still very much important, which is what makes us human, and how do we deal with the cards that we are given, how do we deal with the world around us, and where has it gone wrong, and how can we still keep our humanity and our essential dignity. It does that in a funny and powerful way. And if you like vampires, this is probably the best Discworld novel you'll read. If you're like me and you're not a huge fan of vampires, you can still take a lot out of it, and I certainly did this time around, so I'm glad I reread it. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed Carpe Jugulum. Let me know what you think about the book. Let me know how much I misread it, and I'll talk to you about something else very soon. And if you want to join us talking about Fifth Elephant, you now know where to find us. Anyway, have a great day. Cheers.